Is Noah Raford. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Dubai Future Foundation, and on behalf of our CEO, His Excellency Saif Al-Alili, who is currently doing his military service and so can't join us, and our acting CEO, His Excellency Abdullah bin Touk, who is currently on a trip to the United States, I'd like to welcome you all and thank our colleagues at Smart Dubai, our colleagues at DED, and most importantly, our colleague Mo, for bringing together such an extraordinary event. So I would like to share a little story with you to begin with. Can we please go ahead? So imagine that you have a business, many of you have a business, or you run an institution, a department, or a holding company, and you think that there is an opportunity for growth. So you hire some of the best consultants and lawyers and bankers and analysts in your field to do a comprehensive study of what you might be able to grow. And they come back to you with this number. They think, okay, you might, in the next decade, have opportunity for 4 times growth. For most people, that's actually not bad. Like, we would all like to see our businesses grow by a factor of 4. But you have an intuition. You think, based on your relationships, based on your knowledge, based on your experience of the local market, that there's an opportunity for significantly more growth. So what do? Right? Do you do what they say, and you go for a more moderate growth path? So a show of hands. Who's gonna listen to the expert advice? No one. Wow, that's bad news for consultants in the room. Do you maybe just wait and see, wait and test the market conditions a little bit more before you expand? Anyone? Wait it out? Have a look? All right, one brave soul here, maybe a rational soul here, right? Or do you follow your instincts and do you make a bigger bet that is more commensurate with the scale of opportunity that you see? In fact, this is the challenge that Dubai faced, and Sheikh Rashid, the founding father of Dubai, faced in 1972 with the ports. At the time, there was one dock in Dubai. And he hired the bankers and analysts, and they said, you have room for about expansion of maybe 4 more docks. So you could grow to 4 docks. And much to the consternation of the advisors and bankers and lawyers that he had hired, he said, no way, we're going for 14 more docks. So he expanded the size of the business, if you will, by a factor of 14. Now, this was the year before the Iran-Iraq war, right? And as a result, immediately, by the time the docks had been finished, it was operating at 100% capacity, and it basically operated nonstop at or over 100% capacity for the next 15 years. It grew so much, in fact, that they opened a second port, Jebel Ali Port, which is one of the world's largest ports, and created the birth of DP World, which is one of the world's largest shipping conglomerates, and now has operations in almost 80 countries around 80 different terminals in almost 40 different countries around the world, right? So you probably are detecting a pattern here, and this goes with the comments made by my colleagues earlier. But I want to share one more example with you. So you still have your same business, and your main customer comes to you and says, either you do business only with me, or I'm taking my business elsewhere. And this customer comprises 70% of your total business. Again, you have a dilemma. Right? What would you do? Do you do what they say, even though this might go against your entire business philosophy, one of openness, of trade with anyone? Do you capitulate to their demands and do what they ask? Do you close down the business, liquidate your assets, and try and go into something else? Right? Easier said than done. Or again, do you risk it and go your own way? Do you take a chance and make a big bet on what you see to be the emerging trends and opportunities in your sector or your market? Well, this is exactly what happened to Dubai in 1985 with Sheikh Mohammed. Dubai airports at the time was served by a variety of airlines, but the biggest one was Gulf Air, a regional conglomerate. And in 1985, they told Sheikh Mohammed, you have 3 days to give us this answer. Either you give us exclusivity and cancel your open skies policy, which would mean doing business with anyone could land in Dubai, or we're pulling out our business. And at the time, that's the Dubai airport in 1985. I mean, for those of you who flew in, you can see a little bit of a change. But this was an extraordinary lifeline to the rest of the world. And so, Sheikh Mohammed created Emirates Airlines, borrowed 2 planes from Pakistan International Airlines, made a small capital investment, and that has then grown to become the world's best airline. Dubai Airport has grown to become the world's busiest airport, such that we've opened another one just recently, and expanding even further. And it has really become, along with the ports, the thing that integrates Dubai and the UAE with the global economy, with north, south, with east, west, with old, new. In fact, one of my favorite statistics about this is that if you look at any random long-haul flight, say, for example, the Dubai-Rio flight, 90% of it are Chinese businessmen coming from China. So this airline and this kind of big, bold bets has served to integrate Dubai, not just with the world and take advantage of an emerging opportunity at the time, but has helped set the pace for what the future of air travel looks like. So this is, you're probably sensing this pattern here. Now, Mo asked me to talk about implementation, but at this point, I don't feel like we're really the best people to talk about implementation. Our colleagues at Smart Dubai are taking this forward, as are many of our other colleagues in the room that many of you know are actually working on some of these exciting pilot projects. So instead, I just want to talk about what I think is more important than implementation, and that's vision. That's the vision behind committing to these kinds of bold challenges. And this is particularly important because vision in today's world is extremely important. We are facing an extraordinary number of challenges and confusion and debates and contests. When His Highness recently launched this 10X initiative, which His Excellency Wissam mentioned, he had this quote which really stuck with me, that the future will not be as patient with us as the present is today. You, no doubt, are familiar with all the technological breakthroughs that we're facing, not just in distributed services like blockchain and cryptocurrencies, but the fundamental explosion in big data, in ubiquitous sensing and computing, in artificial intelligence and machine learning, and robotics. These are producing extraordinary breakthroughs, not just in robots and machine intelligence for various tasks, but actually fundamentally reforming vast sectors of the economy. If you look historically at the last decade of what they call jobless growth, the truth of the matter is that most technological growth does not produce new jobs. Right? We're facing a fundamental transformation of what it means to have an economy not based on labor. This is an extraordinarily important question that is opening both new opportunities but also new challenges. We're just beginning to understand how the human brain and body works. We're making breakthroughs on a daily basis, which are enabling paralyzed people to feed themselves again, to walk again, bringing sight back to the blind, bringing hearing back to the deaf, helping people learn, overcome challenges of Alzheimer's, and all sorts of extraordinary challenges and opportunities. And this doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of synthetic biology and genetic engineering, as you can see here in this picture from China, in fact. So you see these two dogs. These dogs are twins. They're from the same mother. But the dog in the middle had one small edit made to its genetic makeup with a process called CRISPR-Cas9. I'm sure you've heard of it, which is a very efficient, cheap, and accurate way of modifying genes. And this one small edit made it grow muscle faster. That's it, just one small tweak. And you can see the dramatic difference here. Right? 2 years ago, China came out in public saying it had already modified the human embryo using this approach. The first in the world to publicly admit to that. The UK recently followed. And we are going to see in the next decade or two a fundamental transformation, not just of what business means and what government means, but what life itself means. And all of these opportunities are going to have extraordinary debates, and they're going to take place in the context of even more difficult challenges. And I don't want to sound like a doomsayer here, but we are going to face an extraordinarily stressful next 2 decades, particularly decade. As you probably know, last year, in 2016, we crossed what many climate scientists consider to be the point of no return with climate change. Right? There's more CO2 in the atmosphere now than ever before, and even if we stopped emitting CO2 today, which of course we're not, we're continuing to emit more, even if we stopped emitting CO2 today, we're still going to face radical climate change impacts in our lifetime, which correlate to more frequent and more intense storms, which is going to have anywhere between 250 and 350 million people rendered homeless in the next 20 to 30 years as this devastates coastal cities, particularly in Southeast Asia and rapidly urbanizing environments. We're going to have more frequent long-term and intense droughts, which is going to produce a catastrophic impact on the food chain. The UAE imports about 85% of its food, and many analysts believe that the droughts which preceded the crop failures in Russia is what preceded the Syrian civil war and exacerbated all the social tensions around the Arab Spring. And this is all going to come together in extraordinary challenges to the existing governance agreements, existing business models and market approaches, and existing understandings of who we are and what we believe we should be doing. This is video footage from last year in Hyderabad during the so-called the water protests, when the state privatized the water supply and sold it to the neighboring state in India. And there was, depending on who you believe, anywhere between 60 and 80 million people on the street. Right? It's an extraordinary figure, and we're going to see more of this. So this is just going to exacerbate the tensions which we face as individuals, right? Working together. Who do we trust? Who are we? How do we define ourselves? Who do we think should be led into our country and led into our business models and our practices? And we already see the effects of this across the globe. So in the Dubai Future Foundation, we have a thesis about what the next decade or two looks like, and it looks like this, right? That the 20th century is going to be breaking at an exponential rate. We're already quite a far way down this curve, but it's going to be getting a lot worse. But in that context, the 21st century is still being born. So all the things which we've already mentioned that you guys are already pioneers in are going to become increasingly mature, increasingly powerful, and increasingly reliable so that increasing sectors of our economy and society can rely upon them. Things like blockchain, things like automation in the workforce, personal AI assistance, things like digital healthcare, all these sorts of things which are going to fundamentally transform things. But we face at least a decade of transition, at least. And transition is probably putting it mildly. Right? This is going to be a decade of argument, of contest, of fight, of debate, of experimentation, of small experiments that scale exponentially, of big exponential experiments that fall on their face. And this is the context into which we, in the Dubai government, all of you doing business, are marching very, very rapidly. So this is part of what His Highness Sheikh Mohammed has tasked the Future Foundation with, called the Future Agenda. The country itself, the UAE, is around 45 years old now. As His Excellency Wissam mentioned, we've recently launched something called the 10X program, which is to be 10 years ahead of other cities. What this really means is to achieve the same amount of progress, which we've developed over the last 45 years, in the next 10 years. Because that's the only way that the UAE is going to be able to experiment its way actively through this contested decade here. And that's what is behind the vision of the blockchain strategy. 100% government transactions on the blockchain. This is what's behind our 3D printing strategy. This is the 3D printed office. It's the world's first and only 3D printed building. We urge you guys to check it out whilst you're still in Dubai. It also led to the launch with the Dubai municipality and our partners of the Dubai 3D printing strategy, which commits the city to 25% 3D printing by the year 2030. That means from the year 2019, 2% of your building will have to be 3D printed. And every year, to get a building permit, year on year, we're going to add 2% more. So it's going to start with doorknobs and hinges and decorations, and it's going to build to window frames and furniture, and then before you know it, you'll have entire buildings printed out of 3D printing technology and automated robotic construction. Same is true for autonomous transport and many other industries. There's some exciting announcements that we'll be making very shortly about some new challenges this year. So, to wrap up, put yourself back in the shoes of someone having to face these challenges, as I mentioned at the beginning. Professor 101, right? It's December 2014. It's the first ever Bitcoin event in the region. Is Bruce here? Organized by Bruce Fenton. So, there you go. So I was asked to speak there, and imagine you meet some guy, this gentleman on the left, who says, "Hi, I work for the Prime Minister's office. I'm here to help you," right? So give us your ideas. And then a couple of months later, this is June 2015, you get this email, which said, "Big Dream Challenge, you're invited. Let's create a big dream for the UAE in the blockchain space. What would put Dubai on the map for this? What could the one thing that Dubai could do and only Dubai could do that would excite and inspire the entire world?" And you go to this meeting and there's about 10 people there. And you know about 8 of them, right? But you keep going to these meetings and these evolve into, about 4 months later, the first formal meeting of this group, which becomes the Global Blockchain Council. And that has multinationals, regulators, banks, government employees, startups. And you start to ask yourself, wow, this might be interesting. What can we do about this? And then literally less than 6 months later, you see this tweet from Sheikh Hamdan saying that the entire government is committing itself to 100% transactions on the blockchain. What do you do? Do you wait and see what happens? Do you laugh and ignore them, as some did? Right? Or do you bet big on this transformational challenge, on this transformational city, move your entire company to Dubai and help build the future? Of course, I'm biased. But I want to emphasize to you that implementation is extremely important. But the engineering challenges around this are eminently solvable. And with the amount of brains and technical prowess in this room, that is not going to be a problem. The real challenge that we're facing here is building the social and political and emotional courage, individually, in your company, in your government department, to actually step into these risky, scary new opportunities. Because we've faced these kinds of challenges before, and let's not make any bones about this. This is an existential threat that we're facing. There are going to be serious winners and losers in the next 10 years. There are going to be countries that exist now that don't exist in 10 years. There may be new countries founded. Certainly, the vast majority of businesses that exist now, big and small, will no longer be in operation in 10 to 15 years. There'll be new industry giants, right? So this is a serious threat. But we've had these kinds of threats before, these existential challenges before. After the Great Depression in the United States, there was a fundamental reimagining of the role of government in supporting new economic growth. And that led to the construction of all of America's great infrastructure, the roads, universities, the dams, the power plants. After the Second World War, facing some of the worst tragedies the world had ever seen, fundamentally reimagining together what does international relations and international governance look like in the creation of the UN, which was dedicated to the very noble dream of ending conflict. Or in the depths of the Cold War, proposing some crazy scientific mission that no one ever thought was possible, and no one ever thought could be done, and devoting 2 to 3% of your entire GDP to achieving the single goal of going to the moon. And these things have happened before, and indeed, maybe even scarier and worse. So we have the opportunity together to make these sorts of challenges and to actually step into them. So I would just like to end on the words of Sheikh Mohammed. This future belongs to those who effect radical changes, not those who make minor, gradual improvements. And I'd like to encourage you and invite you to be a part of this transformational challenge here, and whatever way that makes sense for you, push yourself beyond your comfort zone, work with our partners in Smart Dubai, our partners in DED, and Emirates MBD, and DO, and all of the other partners here, to help make this vision a reality. Because that's what's going to differentiate the winners and losers in the 21st century, and indeed, I think that's what makes life worth living and working on exciting projects together.